Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Before I introduce my esteemed panelist, I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of what we are going to talk about today. We will be talking about future of cybersecurity for energy industries. As we all know, we live in a connected world, whether it is in our personal lives, at home, or at workplace. Technology has become an essential part of our life. Today, we cannot imagine our life without technology every step of the way, whether we are at our workplace, whether we are at home, whether we are helping our children through their schools or any aspect of our life. And if you notice, it is not just the information technology, but the level of automation that has, entered into our lives, both at workplace and at home, is tremendous. And the reason for that is it promises a fantastic outcome and the greater value that we all believe in. But with that, it brings an additional challenge as well. The more technology we use, the more vulnerability we introduce in our enterprise landscape. And with this OT technology becoming mainstream and IT-OT convergence becoming real in our oil and gas industry across the value chain, it is very important that we very carefully look at every aspect of our business and ensure that we are not only carrying our business responsibly, but also protecting both our physical as well as our virtual infrastructure. And that is going to be the core of our discussion today. I have the esteemed panel. Christina, if we can move to the next screen. I would take this opportunity to introduce our esteemed panelist, Lauren Wiedner. She is the CISO at BHP Petroleum, based out of Houston, and extensive experience in managing the cyber aspect of upstream oil operations, both onshore and offshore. I have with me Bhupesh Arora. He is the CIO of Magellan Midstream Partners. He is responsible for securing both IT and OT infrastructure for the critical asset that Magellan has. And he will bring in some interesting perspective of cybersecurity. Vishal Salvi, he is the Infosys CISO and cybersecurity head. We will hear from Vishal how, as a service provider, we bring some of our capabilities, learning, and investment to help our clients. And last but not the least, Christina Richmond. She is the Program VP, Cybersecurity Services at IDC, and she will be our moderator for today's session. With that, I will hand it over to Christina. Christina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. It is such a pleasure to be with everyone today. And we do have a great lineup of panelists. To kick us off, I'm going to just go through a few slides from IDC, which is a research and analysis firm. And as Rajiv said, I'm a vice president of the security services team there. So we do research on the breadth and depth of security services, including the impact on operational technology, and specific to this webinar to oil and gas or energy. So the title, as you've seen, is Future of Cybersecurity in the Energy Industry. Well, I thought I would start with a 100,000-foot view, which we like to do at IDC. We're known for research and analysis and marketing content, but we're also known for our market sizing and our forecasting of markets. So we predict that global spending for the operational technology services market specifically will grow at about 9% compound annual growth rate until 2024, and it'll reach about $115 billion globally. That's a worldwide number by the end of that period, growing from a start of about $75 billion in 2019. So 9% CAGR is nothing to laugh at. It's a good, strong CAGR. And so this market is seeing a great deal of services overall, but it's also seeing growth in the security spend, both products and services. So in this slide, I show 2018 to 2023, and you can see it's split out by all four of the heavy operational technology industries. And so when we say that this is millions of dollars and then you've got the three zeros on the left, think billions. Okay, so you can see that the CAGR for security spend is higher than the overall operational technology services market at nearly 11%. And then when you look at just oil and gas, and that's that light blue that starts very thin in 2018, and it gets bigger and bigger towards 2023, oil and gas has a higher CAGR than not only the operational technology services market that was 9%, but also bigger than the security spend CAGR for all industries. So you can see that oil and gas is a very fast growing market in terms of spending on security. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about why that is and what's happening in the operational technology sphere, especially in oil and gas. So from some research that we did twice, we've actually done it in 2018 and then we did it again in 2020. And I've put the numbers here, the percentages for the 2020 data. So from this research, we can see that OT security responsibilities are converging. Our panelists know this. I'm sure the audience knows this as well. Right, so the key takeaways on this slide are the last two columns where it says as an integrated system managed by separate organizations or as an integrated system managed within one organization. You can see the uptick in the last 2 years means that responsibilities for security are moving from these separate, unintegrated systems and responsibility matrices to ones that are more integrated and managed. It could still be managed by separate organizations, but the systems themselves are integrated, or they're managed by one organization. So we're seeing this consolidation or convergence occurring. So I put a couple of notes on the right from some budget questions that we asked. We have seen that security has definitely risen as an investment priority from 2018 to 2020. But over the last 12 months, they're saying that there has been a bit of a decrease in spend. Now consider where we've been for the last 9 months of those 12. We've been in the midst of a global pandemic. So I just caution, I wanted to give some guidance, back to this slide. We're seeing great growth in oil and gas, tempered a little bit perhaps by COVID-19. And I think that's just a normal thing that's happening with this pandemic. What are the priorities for folks in oil and gas? So the first thing, of course, is to integrate the IT and the OT systems. And there's a lot that goes into that, and we'll talk about that with our esteemed panelists. But just a few things that might be happening. Cultural differences between the OT landscape and the personnel within that, and the IT personnel. And so there's this personnel understanding that needs to occur as the systems themselves are integrated. So number one priority in terms of overall securing of these systems is to first integrate them. The next one is to use Internet of Things, or IoT. And we know within oil and gas specifically, IoT sensors can be very, very useful out in the field. They can help with monitoring and sensing the health of rigs, of oil drilling, of applications out in the field. And then they can also, in some cases, actually help do maintenance or remediation. So that's a number two priority. Number three overall is security. And we've seen this bubble up from 2018 to 2020. We've seen this go up, higher and higher and higher. It was much lower in 2018, and now it's number three. So this study is different from our worldwide study. It is a European study, so I just want to call that out. It is a different market, but I thought it was really interesting and adds color to what's happening during this IT-OT convergence with regard to security. So folks want to make sure that they maintain the safety and the reliability of legacy systems. They also are concerned about the number of connected devices, and that harks back to the IoT comment I made. They also are managing multiple industrial protocols, and that is really challenging as they try to come to some rationalization of the systems that they need to secure. And as I mentioned, culture, right? So communication between IT and OT personnel is critical. So finding the right vendor is always important. And then, of course, managing heterogeneous systems is a key concern. And then visibility. I know on the IT security side of the house, visibility is core. We need to know what we're monitoring and tracking to be able to remediate or at least respond to an incident. So getting visibility in the IT and the OT sphere is important. So just to sum up from my perspective as a researcher, I'm not the feet on the ground. I am not in front of the customers every day in terms of building the security for a BHP like Lauren, or working as Bhupesh does with Magellan. So I'm not in front of those customers every day or within my organization working to secure an oil and gas infrastructure. And then, of course, I'm also not Infosys, and Vishal will speak to that perspective about how Infosys is helping their customers work with this challenge on a day-to-day basis. But from my perspective in the research, what we have to do is bridge the gap. It's a cultural gap, it's a visibility gap, it's a systems rationalization that needs to occur. We also have to help with basic hygiene. It's the blocking and tackling of security, right? So just being able to configure properly and then do patching and continuous sort of vulnerability management and pen testing is important. And then driving that cultural integration. And of course, the pandemic does bring us challenges. We've had expanded remote workforce, we've had this economic uncertainty, and then with the threat landscape evolution, OT is a bigger target. And sadly, we're seeing ransomware across all of OT and also in oil and gas. But enough of my talking, because really we want to hear from our panel of experts. So I'm going to lead a discussion now. And what I'd first like to do is ask the team of panelists if they would please take a couple of minutes and just give us a little more in-depth understanding of what your role is and what's most important to you. What are your priorities in your day-to-day? So Lauren, would you kick us off, and then I'll go to Bhupesh next.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lauren Widener, based out of Houston. I work for BHP as Rajiv had mentioned. I've been in the role for a few years now, spent the last 20 years in the energy sector. If you're unfamiliar with BHP, we are a natural resource company. We have operations in both Australia and the Americas, and we're based out of Melbourne, Australia. And maybe some of the things that are on my priority list, like every leader who is looking after cybersecurity is ransomware. As you can see, the numbers are really ticking up, and there are steps that you can take to mitigate some of the risks that's coming to each of us. And it's not a matter of if, it's really a when. Thank you, Christina.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. And I would add, it's not a matter of if or when, it's a matter of how often, sadly. And I'm seeing that across the security industry. So you're absolutely right to highlight ransomware. Bhupesh, would you please give us a sense of your role and your top priorities?
Thank you, Christina, and good morning, good evening, everyone. It's great to be on this panel. So I'm the CIO of Magellan Midstream Partners. We've been in the business for 20 years. We are a $3 billion public company, and we are in the business of distributing, storing, transporting refined petroleum as well as crude oil across the United States. So we are primarily a U.S. company. We have grown over time. We have almost 10,000 miles of refined pipelines and around 2,000 plus miles of crude oil pipeline that goes to the heart of America, the central part of America. We have a lot of independent terminals for storage, millions of barrels being stored out there. So we're a very diverse company as a midstream company. We do blending as well. my role is to obviously manage the information technology from a cybersecurity viewpoint. Just before I go into cybersecurity, so I joined the company around 7 months back, and I've been in the industry 20 years plus, variety of industries. So I'm not like Lauren, who's got 20 years in energy. I've got 20 years in 5 industries. Energy is a new one for me, so I'm pretty excited to join it, and it's a very exciting industry to be in. So shifting to cybersecurity's priorities, right? So we have put together a cybersecurity strategy, and this strategy has 3 components, which is strengthening the core is one category, education is a second category, and innovation is a third category. And we have initiatives on each one of them. So when you think about strengthening the core, operational technology is the heart of it, right? Obviously, IT systems as well, but OT and maturing that, strengthening that security is an ongoing process. That's a very important component. Besides just making sure that, like every cybersecurity department will have, strengthening our firewalls, egress points, and privileges, access to IT systems, all that comes into what I call strengthening the core. The second component of the strategy is about education. Education is very, very critical to cybersecurity, especially when it comes to phishing. And phishing being kind of a lead-in into ransomware, because if you get phished, that's how the hackers get into your systems, right? So that's a very, very important component. We track it very closely. We do a lot of education, as well as send out emails to test employees' awareness and capability to handle phishing. And the other part is obviously doing red team assessments and making sure that we have an external party looking at our infrastructure. The third component is innovation. As you mentioned, the risk profile for all companies is changing as OT and IT is getting very integrated, right? We don't have as much IoT devices yet, right? But we are in the cusp of changing that, right? And that's going to happen, and it's going to be like a hockey stick, depending on the business case and the value. But we have some, and so that's why the risk profile is changing for us, right? And that is extremely important for us to understand. And as these new components are coming into the environment, we need to innovate, whether it's cloud, whether it's 5G, whether it's IoT. So that's we call it the innovation in cybersecurity. That's our focus, that's a strategy, and that's a continual strategy as we add new elements and we keep on top of what we already mature in. I hope that helps.
That's wonderful, Prakash. Thank you so much. And Vishal, let me go to you. If you would please give us a sense of your role and what your key priorities are at Infosys.
Thank you so much, Christina, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who joined today. Hi to Rupesh and Lauren. Thanks so much for joining today for this panel discussion. So my role, I have a dual role in Infosys. I am the Global Chief Information Security Officer, and I'm also head of the cybersecurity business. I've been at Infosys for more than 4 years now, overall in the industry for 27 years, and in cybersecurity for almost 2 decades. So because of this duality of the role, my aim for Infosys is to protect Infosys and its customers, from all the threats that are there. So we kind of have a strategy where we invest in people, process, and technology to drive that strategy and be in forefront in terms of being ahead of the curve and driving and innovating and building new and modern controls, and constantly, like you talked about, Christina, building the hygiene, getting the basics right and the boring stuff, working properly. So the focus is to really be at the cutting edge of deploying the best of the breed cybersecurity technologies to protect Infosys and its customers. And on the business side, it's all about amplifying the work that we are doing and adding value to our customers. So the idea is to see how we can innovate, how we can build highly motivated, passionate, and competent team which can go there and deliver the value that the world is asking, because there's a big demand supply problem right now in terms of big demand for cybersecurity professionals and very less number of people available. So that's really what we're focused on.
That's great. Thank you so much. So you can see we have a very expert panel. We've got folks with decades of experience. We've got Chief Information Officer and 2 Chief Information Security Officers with us. So now we're going to dive into the part of the discussion that I really enjoy the most. It's where, you know, we'll have a conversation amongst the 4 of us, mostly with the 3 experts that we have on the panel, and I'll guide the discussion. But what I'd like to suggest to the audience is that you find the Q&A button at the top of your screen, or it might be off to the side. And so you find that and you start to put questions in, because we are going to give you 10, 12 minutes at the end of this session to ask your questions of these esteemed experts. So great. So let me dive in. So we did talk a little bit about convergence in my slides. And then, of course, Bhupesh, you also brought up, you know, the new architectures that we're leaning into, whether it's, you know, cloud or multi-cloud, and then there's 5G on the horizon. And you said something about how, you know, we don't have a lot of IoT devices, but we're just on the cusp and we're about to dive in. So let me bring it to the panel. Are you seeing this convergence? Is this just an obvious table stake that's occurring in this industry between IT and OT systems? And if so, what are the trends that you're seeing around security or the implications of this convergence? Lauren, let me start with you, and then we'll go round robin, and I'll bring in Bhupesh and then Vishal.
Thanks, Christina. So maybe can I start off and saying there's certain things I can't talk about because they're specific to BHP. So I say very generic and, you know, leave it to the lawyer to spoil all the fun, right? And so I just want to make sure that you understand that a lot of things I can't really share. But I can
appreciate that. Thank you, Lauren. That's important.
But
Thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. I don't want to give you an impression that I'm hiding anything. It's just there's something that I can't talk about. And I think that everyone can understand that. Okay, IT and OT convergence is such a big word. And when I have a very small brain, and so when I hear a big concept, I have to break it down to small chunks that I can digest, right? So there's a culture aspect of it. If you take an typical technology person, that person has a certain set of skills, right? And that person goes through the journey of managing IT systems. And when you tell that person, oh, you need to patch and you need to reboot to bring the server back up, they don't blink an eye, right? Because if emails go down for 10 minutes, people celebrate like, yay, I can actually do work. But if you tell an OT person who's managing product systems that are affecting production as well as potentially safety systems, they say, go take a hike. I'm not taking the system down because it halts productions and we lose visibility on what dangerous gas is emitting, what the pressure reading is like on our platform, right? And so when we talk about convergence, the first thing is nomenclature, 2 different skill sets coming together and making sure we talk the same language, right? So when we say, IT, you got a patch, this is your runway, one day for critical or 24 hours for criticals, I think that runway is much longer for OT because a lot of times they have to wait until there's a shutdown period to do maintenance. That's when they do all the upgrades, system patching, and then bring them all up at one time. So when I've done a lot of research, and what industry's doing is mainly one is awareness, nomenclature, bringing the 2 skill sets together. And I haven't seen it done well if it's managed by the same team. It's really 2 teams coming together under one roof, one house, but they have their separate rooms that they manage, right? Because it's 2 different skill sets at this point. Christina, maybe some other of our panelists can chime in as well.
Yeah, you bring up some great points, and I love that you bring the lexicon or the nomenclature in, and I love that it's a team sport. And so, Bhupesh, feel free if this is not within your milieu to pass the ball to Vishal if you like. I want to make sure that each of the panelists is comfortable with what we're discussing, and we don't all do the same thing. So it's okay to say, hey, I'm going to pass on this. But let me toss the microphone to you, Bhupesh. Anything to add on IT-OT convergence? You talked about education also, so there might be a tie-in there. But let me pass the microphone to you.
Thank you, Christina. I think IoT-IT convergence is a mandate. It's not an option anymore. And the convergence, whether it happens from a team structure or not, that's somewhat irrelevant. But what's relevant is the processes, the importance of cybersecurity, the understanding of what are the risks and what are the new components we're putting in place. So that is our primary goal internally here, right? So we have very good relationships with the OT personnel, and it starts from ground up, right? Because we manage the infrastructure for OT, the servers, essentially. That's what we're talking about, the technology servers. So it's important that they follow the same processes, whether it's for change management, right? Even core processes, it's important, right? So when we talk about, affecting system uptime, it starts from those aspects because we share those common components. We also have active dialogues on which places we want to intersect and which places we want to really keep separate for protection, right? What are the egress points? What are the least privilege principles? So that's always a dialogue, and there is clarity and decisions on that. We also have infrastructure, my infrastructure leader that has ongoing meetings on a regular basis to talk about where IT is going, so they understand where OT can converge and not converge, and what is the timing of that. The other component that we are bringing OT up to speed is more on the innovation, right? It's not just about cybersecurity, but what can they leverage for uptime within their operations, how they can get more visibility into their environment. So OT is around processes. I think Christina mentioned, Lauren, you mentioned culture, as well as, I would say, making sure that we have alignment and in terms of the importance of how OT and IT converges in those elements. I think there's a huge opportunity for every organization to become more efficient as these two areas come together, especially with IoT and 5G. And I'm looking forward to seeing what are our value cases and provide better customer service to our actual customers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So Vishal, I'm going to give you a different question here. And Bhupesh and Lauren and I have talked a little bit about IoT and 5G and all of the difference that's coming with 5G. We'll have edge compute, we'll have massive explosion of devices at the edge. What are you seeing with your customers, Infosys customers, around the use of IoT out in oil and gas, within, if you can sort of position it within this consideration of IT and OT convergence and how IoT can help and how it might bring in more vulnerability?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. And I think before I jump and answer that question, I think one interesting aspect of this convergence is really the way in which the organizations are demanding and making the CISO accountable for both these challenges, right? And it's a new problem because OT has not, been in the limelight as far as cybersecurity is concerned until recently, when there is a demand for this convergence. And suddenly there is a need to have somebody look at it, and who best than a CISO to be the person who becomes the de facto person to ride and drive that. And I think the interesting aspect of that is that the CISO is, now has to, it's organization change management, because, traditionally IT and OT had been working in silos, almost OT is the business, or in oil and gas, and so they have their own system, their own organization structure, and so the CISO needs to now establish, because you have that accountability, but you really don't know how to drive that change. So I think that's a very interesting aspect of this change that we are seeing happening. And I think most of the CISOs are right now grappling with and therefore making OT security as the number one priority item, because ICT is something which has been done and dusted, and it's something which you need to operate and you need to constantly monitor. But given the fact that you're in oil and gas, you need to make sure that this part, which is now your new accountability, needs to be addressed. So I think that's a very interesting challenge. I think to answer your question in terms of how IoT, plays a role, I think it all depends really in terms of what kind of automations and what kind of innovations each industry is bringing in. IoT has a very strong play in manufacturing. We have seen that. And so therefore, it helps you in driving some of that convergence. But typically in oil and gas, we currently are seeing a situation where there is definitely a need to make sure we build the robust processes, being able to get at a minimum visibility in terms of what's happening in the environment, and then how do I create proper gateways and segregation and yet allow that convergence to happen. And so we're still at the nascent stages in terms of really trying to build a robust policy and a framework which I can deploy for this whole infrastructure, and then start looking at, in terms of how do I look at IoT. I think the way we are looking at IoT is in terms of, how cloud can play a very important role in addressing that at edge, and how we can have reusable components and reserviceable components, so that every manufacturer, every developer does not have to solve that problem, but really can borrow that technology and reuse that technology and align to a standard way of building security when it comes to IoT. Christina?
Great, thank you very much. So you brought up something that I think we could talk about for a little bit, and that is as IT and OT converge, and it's a mandate. I agree with you, Bhupesh. It's a bit of an obvious question whether you're seeing that convergence, because I think everyone in oil and gas is, and across the market, I think OT is seeing this convergence, because we're in this digital transformation period in business where the benefits outweigh some of the risks, not all of the risks, perhaps, and we have to make sure we secure properly so that we don't invite too many of the risks. But the benefits of digital transformation provide us business insight. They provide us the ability to monitor systems, to be able to improve systems. It allows the innovation that I think all three of you have talked about, and innovation is key across all of the OT sort of heavy industries, but also key in oil and gas. So let's talk a little bit about innovation for a couple of minutes, and then we'll go to maybe ransomware next. But let's talk a little bit about innovations. What do you see are innovations on the horizon for your industry? It doesn't have to be specific to BHP or Magellan or Infosys, because we don't want to upset the legal teams. But what are some of the innovations in the industry, Lauren, that you're seeing that you think also introduce risk?
Thanks, Christina. One area that I'm really seeing a big trend is automation, innovation in automation, right? So at BHP, safety is our number one priority. So that's physical safety as well as cyber safety, because our people are in harm's way when they move the coal from the ground onto a training platform, or they're drilling out in the Gulf of Mexico. They are in harm's way. And so where people are in harm's way, we find ways to see if we can automate and remove the people from that chain of events, right? So let's talk about automation. We have some automation systems so that the operator can monitor the system from a distance away and not have to be physically on the area where they could be in harm's way. So that's one innovation area that I'm really seeing a big trend on. With anything else, it brings a risk of cybersecurity. And so we look at it, and if you look at cybersecurity kill chain, the kill chain of cybersecurity, right? So there's many steps along the way before you are harmed. So anywhere along the chain where you can interrupt an event, you can either mitigate it or prevent it altogether. And so we look at that chain. This is public information. Everyone, if you Google, you can find all these kill chain that was published over quite a few years ago. And you look at each step and say, can we interrupt the kill chain here or here? And so cybersecurity is still utmost. But you have to look at an extinction lens, meaning you have limited budget, you have limited resources. What is it that's going to kill you or disrupt your operation to the point where you can't recover? That's the top of the pyramid, right? So there are events that are annoying, security events that are annoying at the bottom. That's just constantly that little alarm that keeps going off, but it doesn't really hurt you in any way. It's just like you're constantly having to silence the alarm. But as you go up the chain of the pyramid, if you can imagine, the top of the pyramids are events that can really cripple you and prevent recovery of your organization. And so we try to look at the kill chain as well as the pyramid of events that could really hurt us, and where they intersect. That's where we want to put our focus in. Because I think with any organization, especially in this day and age, you have limited resources and budget as well. Thanks, Christina.
You bring up some really good points about the intersection of physical harm versus cyber harm, and prioritizing what the risks are based on loss of life versus loss of intellectual property or critical systems. Those have to be prioritized very highly. And then going down to some of the annoying issues that might occur, and those, of course, are not as critical. Bhupesh, you've spoken quite a bit about innovation. What specific innovations are you seeing in the oil and gas industry, and how do you think it brings in additional risk, maybe adding on to what Lauren has said, or something completely different?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. So I think the key or the umbrella term or the focus for innovation is how do we become a data-driven business? And that drives multiple initiatives across all areas, right? Looking for opportunities where we can where we can automate, bring some data into the picture, and make some good decisions out of it, right? So we are exploring opportunities in every function, whether it's operations, whether it's in finance, right? And that's across the board. And seeing where does automation lend to value, right? And how do we automate? And the variety of use cases that we are building up, and a strategic roadmap around that. Because certain areas, we don't know enough. And that's where the risk profile component comes into play, right? You don't want to jump into innovation quickly. You want to validate concepts. You want to really understand how your risk profile is changing. What is the impact on cybersecurity? So what we're doing is across functions, we're gathering those opportunities for becoming a data-driven business. And then out of that pipeline, we will implement certain concepts, right? Whether it's an IoT, for example, whether it's how do we get better data. So that all is data that only improves us, right? Further, and helps to create value. So that data and the mobility and which I mean by the access to data, whether it's mobile, whether it's on a desktop, makes it more of a real-time company, right? And there's a whole set of initiatives that come along with that, as I mentioned. How does your cybersecurity risk profile change? I think it changes a lot, because the way you implement those technologies, you could be dependent on external entities, right? Those external entities, there's always a decision between, do I go external to gain more agility in the innovation, or do I build it myself that protects me? So that balance and that equation of what is the right answer is weighed on every decision. So we are protecting our environment. So I hope that clarifies what our focus on innovation, as well as how do you bring cybersecurity in the picture.
Super helpful, Bhupesh. I'm a big advocate for the life cycle of services because that's what I cover. I cover the research around security services. And I think you've both, excuse me, Lauren and Bhupesh, talked about you have to know what your goal is. You have to know where your innovation needs to go. That's often led by the business. And then you have to understand what are the risks that are introduced with that kind of innovation discussion. Innovation is accelerating because of digital transformation. The need for data and data security, as you brought up, Bhupesh, is accelerating because of the move to cloud, the move to 5G as we really see that start to take off. And so as we accelerate this innovation from the business side or from the IT side or from the OT side, we have to really do risk assessment. And so the life cycle of services from consultative, where we're looking at assessments and we're looking at what our strategy is and what our policies are, all the way out to integration and maybe even management being done by service providers like Infosys to help with the management day-to-day of eyes on screen are what I study. The one thing that I think we'll also bring in here is in the study that I do of the life cycle, and Lauren talked about the kill chain, when you have something that occurs in the kill chain where it is an incident and it is something you have to pay attention to, you must have your planning in place. And that is another area that as you innovate and as you look for areas that you can expand your businesses, you need to make sure that you have a plan in place for that. You know, it's not if or when, it's how often something might happen like ransomware, and what kind of plan do you have in place for that. So Vishal, I want to go to you, if I may, for one of the last discussion points before we open this up to questions. I know that we have a few minutes at the end where we're going to have Vishal go through a few slides for us. So I do want to ask the audience again, what is piquing your interest? What areas that you feel are not being addressed could be addressed by your question? And please go to that Q&A tab. But Vishal, let me go to you and talk about how do you help customers plan for this inevitable challenge, or it could be, you know, just an alert, it could be an incident, it could be an actual breach. How do you help your customers plan for that and then work through it?
Yeah, sure. So, Christine, I think, you know, when we talked about automation, and I think oil and gas is seeing a massive transformation when you talk about automation, because they want, like Lauren mentioned, you know, they want as much humans involved in these activities as possible, and so, you know, how they can automate mining and so many other things which are required in oil and gas. Similarly, you know, Bhupesh talked about data, and I think data is, you know, so relevant, and so there's a lot of innovation and change happening on data. I think the third thing that is happening is the adoption of cloud, and you know, that will bring in a lot more transformation to the industry. Now, if you look at all these three things, I think the challenge that we're seeing is that, you know, unless you embed security by design, it is going to be extremely difficult for you to scale to this massive change that is happening around. So the traditional model of managing information security or cybersecurity are failing to deliver this value. And so you would have to embrace, you know, things like security as a code, or you have to embrace, you know, innovation in terms of how you can break the waterfall model and build a more ongoing, active change within the stakeholders. And it's a massive awareness because you need to make sure everybody is, apart from driving functionality, is thinking about security, right? I think only when we start looking at that, we can actually make this really work for us. So what we endeavor to do as a cybersecurity team is to really be, you know, enable this change for our customers and go with that narrative when we embark on any innovation or any change that we want to drive, to build security by design. And a lot of our customers, we are not just doing cybersecurity, we are doing all this the data monetization, we are doing cloud transformation, and we are doing a lot of automation. So my mission, both as a head of cybersecurity as well as the chief information security officer, is to enable and empower our teams to think security when they are innovating this for our customers.
That's great. Thank you so much. So let's talk about the inevitable. And we do have a question, but I'm going to invite the audience to continue putting their questions in. But as a last discussion here, so when the inevitable happens, there are many different strategies. Let's just take ransomware as a potential attack. There are many different strategies companies look at across the landscape that I study. Some of them will have a retainer with an incident responder in place. Some of them will have insurance in place, cyber insurance. Some of them will have monies set aside to pay the attackers so that they can get their data back quickly. And there's many reasons for each of those strategies. So I don't want to ask specifically to BHP or specifically to Magellan, but I do want to ask, what do you think is necessary for the audience to be prepared in light or in view of ransomware on the rise in oil and gas? Lauren, let's start with you.
Christina, this is such a hot topic, and I think it keeps a lot of CISO awake at night, clearly, because if you open the news in the morning, your news feed in the morning, I think a few years ago, it's maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, you see a ransomware incident. And now it's multiple times a day that company gets hit. And I'm going to look at a slide that I have, so I'm looking away from the monitor. But before 2017, most of the cybersecurity attacks were targeted toward military and government for intelligence, national intelligence, and then financial services because they were trying to steal credit cards or financial information that they can create financial fraud, your Social Security, open a new credit card accounts. So at the top of the chain, that was the most lucrative market for them. But now, and in the future, oil and gases get hit, pharmacy, industrial manufacturing. So you have to ask, why are they hitting these market or these industries or in this industry segments? And it's because it's extremely lucrative. Company will not openly share the fact that they paid ransomware. But if you go out to the dark web, what happens is when a company get hit with ransomware, the first thing the bad guy does is publish the fact that you've been hit with ransomware and some of your data is shared out there in the dark web. And you can tell the company that's paid, or you can infer that maybe the company paid because after a certain amount of time, that post is taken down, right? So you have to infer that maybe the company did negotiate and did pay ransomware. And so your company has to have a position going in to say, when you get hit with this thing, when do you engage legal? When do you determine who gets to determine whether you pay or not pay? Do you have a service available to have the ransom payment? Because it's not going to be in dollars, it's going to be in cryptocurrency, which we don't really have readily available. So you have to think about that strategy. But one thing I want to make sure that you understand my passion is recovery. So you assume that you're going to be hit. You assume that you're going to be attacked. When that occurs, what can you do? Do you know your critical systems? Do you know that your critical application services? How quickly do you need to restore that and the order that you need to restore that? And then secondly, do you have an immutable backup? Because I think the industry has been against us, meaning all these innovative ways to do primary and secondary backup, but they're on the same network, right? And if you take cybersecurity out of the picture, that was fantastic because you can do really hot-to-hot backup anytime. You can swap things out. But what does the attacker do? The first thing they go is they attack your primary storage, and then they go and attack your secondary storage. How can they do that? It's on the same network. They just move laterally, destroy both, and they cripple you. If you looked at the Maersk, this is a public event, Maersk incident, a logistic company that was hit with ransomware a few years ago. 90 minutes. It took 90 minutes from when the malware was downloaded to 50,000 devices were encrypted. 90 minutes, right? That's probably less than some of the time we take for lunch or dinner. 90 minutes, you take a whole company down. And what resonated with me was one of the Maersk cybersecurity specialists. He said he broke out in a sweat, and his heart started palpitating because when his screen went black, he stood up and he would see a row of laptops with black screen with ransom notes on it. That was what he saw, right?
Oh,
and so
terrible.
90 minutes, you have to decide, do you have an immutable backup? Because when they take your system down, you can't even call anyone because our telephone is tied to our AD, Active Directory. And unless you personally stored somebody's number on your mobile phone, you didn't even know who to call because when you look up in the guide, you can't even access it. And so 2 things, know what's critical to you, what is in the heart of the organization that you need to protect, and 2, do you have immutable backup? So that means data as well config so that you can do a quick restore and keep going because it's, again, not if, when, and how often, as Christine mentioned.
Yeah, I can tell it's a passion of yours, Lauren, and I would add to your 2 steps, know what's critical to the business and where it is, and then, also the immutable backup for recovery. I think that's a great call out, but also have a plan, and you talked about it, so I would put that in as like a 1.5, right? Know your plan, know who to call, practice the plan, have an incident response plan in place. So we've got a great question from one of our audience members. We're going to switch to a few minutes of Q&A here, and then I'm going to hand the ball to Vishal to go through a couple of slides at the end. How do you measure the success of a cybersecurity program? And I love this question, and there's a lot of discussion internally at IDC, but I want to hear from our experts. So I'm not going to pick one of you. I'm going to allow you to just jump in and let us know how you feel it's important to measure the success of your cybersecurity program. We've heard a lot from Lauren, so I'm going to look to the 2 gentlemen panelists.
Just fine. I can give a quick view into that. I think it's on putting KPIs on everything that you do, right, and seeing how you can improve, whether it's providing access to a system, right? How much time does it take to provide access to a system in a secure manner, right? And go through the processes, agility in that. So being safe at the same time being fast those are the 2 goals we're trying to meet, right? In the metrics, and that's a lot about efficiency, right? So it's efficiency, and then doing things correctly. What we did we do it right? So that's the call it the effectiveness component, right?
So we're getting down to a few minutes before the end, and I think what we'll do is we've got a couple of great questions in the Q&A chat, but I think what we'll do for now is we'll move to the next few slides that we have, and I'm going to hand the presentation ball to Vishal. Not literally, I'll actually move the slides for you, but Vishal, would you please walk us through Infosys cybersecurity? You've got about 5 minutes that you can wrap up with. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Christina. And one of the best way to measure security is to see whether the company has been breached or not, right? That's the at the end of it, that's the bottom line. But I guess that's a very rare event. So you got to make sure that you are able to identify proper measures to see what were the knocks on the door, how many people tried what they did, and then how do you measure that, how do you demonstrate that, and how do you constantly improve on that. And that's why you have KPIs and KRIs. And I think the point that Lauren was talking about in terms of ransomware, I think that gives a good segue for me to get into what I wanted to cover is that apart from building cyber resiliency within your organization, I think it's also important to look at what are the things that we as the industry need to do to improve, to your point when you started off, Christina, about IT hygiene. And is that a wake-up call for all of us to say that, is this the best that we can do or can we do better? And I guess the answer is that we can, but it requires a completely different paradigm shift in terms of what we expect out of the whole ecosystem. And whether it's your technology teams, whether it's your business teams, to say that, hey, things have changed. The frequency of attacks are not in months, not in weeks, but we are talking now in days and hours. And so we need to now look at how we calibrate security in your organizations. And so I'm going to have a zero tolerance. When you talk about zero-day attacks, we're talking about zero tolerance for IT hygiene. And it's no longer okay for me to have no visibility of my 5% of my assets, because those are the ones who are going to introduce risk to me. Or it's no longer okay that I'm going to have a patch management cycle of a few days, because that's not going to be enough. So I'm going to change my game, and that would mean systems going down, getting patched every single day, but that's really what I'm going to do. So when we look at our strategy to help our customers, we're just focusing on driving that, in terms of making sure that we have the right solutions, the right technology, innovation, right teams who can support this mission and, drive that change. So if you go to the next slide, it's about giving a comprehensive approach towards, the service offerings which are there. And so you security is as good as your weakest link, right? So you got to make sure that although there are certain aspects of your IT hygiene which may be mandatory, but it needs to be having a baseline control. You cannot have a risk acceptance there. You got to make them baseline controls because those are fundamentally required, and then you build the layers of security around that. So that's really how we look at our offerings. And if you go to the next slide, it really talks about the way to innovate. So it's extremely hard for a non-technology organization, which is to build and maintain the complex kit that we currently have when it comes to security stacks, right? Any large organization, give or take, have 70 to 100 different technologies, and it's just not able to scale because half of the time the CISO spend in really building the system, whereas the job of the CISO is to really drive the change and be a catalyst to drive the change within the organization. But because they're so much engrossed in building the security architecture, they don't get enough time to work with the organization. So therefore, we want to take that burden of building solutions and systems and deliver it as a service so that, you get technology which is curated, you get IP, and so therefore you focus on the business side of it and derive the value of, what you need to do. So that's really what our promise is. And if you go to the last slide, it's all about really assuring digital trust for our customers, right? By innovation, by having the right teams, right passion, right culture, right foundational principles, so that we can, help in making these goals a reality. Christina, back to you.
Thank you so much, Vishal. And this is the conclusion of our panel today, and I want to thank our wonderful panelists. I think we have an echo, so if you can please mute Vishal. Perfect. Thank you. So we'll just go back and say thank you so much to Lauren Weidner and Bhupesh Arora, Vishal Salvi. It's been a really interesting discussion. Any questions that you may have put into the chat that we didn't get to, I'm informed that the Infosys team will come back to you and answer your questions. And thank you so much for spending an hour with us today, and have a great rest of your day.